past and you will ignore us again. We have run out of excuses and we are running out of time.
Show us your faithfulness. Show us your trustworthiness. Show us your honesty. Prove us wrong. We desperately need you to prove us wrong. God help us all if you fail to prove us wrong. God help us.
Everyone loves a contest. But sport isn't just about victory and defeat. When the GOATs in sport speak, you hear it first on WION.
You have to play good cricket over a period of time.
I actually pushed myself right out of the damn tournament.
We go beyond the stats. Our stories are quoted the world over.
At WION, sport is part of our DNA. Come, join us on this journey. Weekdays 6:30 p.m. IST, 1 p.m. GMT.
The UK is bracing for another rail strike.
The price of energy and food continues to rise. It's no surprise the economy is in such doldrums.
It is a war in which neither side appears on the verge of victory.
Welcome, my name is Vikram Chandra and you're watching This World, a show that brings you the wrap of the week's top stories from around the world. This week, China was in the news a lot and, once again, mostly for wrong reasons. A New York Times article exposed China's smokeless wars, or China's war of influencing opinion. The article also named one of China's foot soldiers in this war, Neville Roy Singham. Now, if you've been following the news, you've surely heard or read about him. And if you haven't, we're here to bring you all the details on the show tonight. You know, how China is trying to buy influence through third parties and also arm twist its way into settling maritime disputes. What am I talking about? Well, how about this? China firing water cannons at a Philippines Coast Guard boat. We're going to be telling you all about that this evening. Also on the show, we look at what's happening in Niger. The coup is now half a month old and the military junta has named a new prime minister. What next? There are talks of military intervention, also of the Wagner group taking security guarantees for the military junta. And finally, Mars has apparently started to spin faster. What is really up with the red planet? Is this something even worth paying too much attention to, or is it something that happens quite often? That story and that analysis coming up later on this program. Well, let's go straight to our cover story. Its face is a man named Neville Roy Singham. Who's he? Well, he's an American technocrat. He lives in Shanghai. He once founded a technology consultancy company called ThoughtWorks. Its website describes Singham as a globally renowned information technology thought leader. But now, a major New York Times investigation has accused Singham of buying influence on behalf of China. Now, some of you are thinking, how exactly do you buy influence? Well, it's really not that difficult. And India has also been mentioned in that particular investigation. According to the New York Times, even in India, Singham reportedly poured money into a website called NewsClick, and this website has now been accused of being soft on China, even biased towards China. Singham is accused of buying this bias between 2018 and 2021. NewsClick apparently received money from 4 different entities linked to Singham. Now, of course, the entire NewsClick issue and what is happening in India has been the subject of considerable debate and discussion, and the entire matter is now before the court. So we will leave that aside for the moment. It is sub judice. But essentially, the New York Times point is that there was a particular template that was applied worldwide to news websites, YouTube channels, print publications, you name it. This happened in India, it happened in Brazil, it happened in South Africa, in the United States, Ghana, Zambia. This is, for example, another online news startup that Singham funded, according to the New York Times. New Frame, based out of Johannesburg, South Africa. One of its former reporters said the publication's editor removed criticism of China's labor practices. Another editor resigned in 2022, citing New Frame's soft coverage on China. You see, the bias is meant to influence real-world politics. It is meant to paint China in a good light, tell China's story, or China's version of an alternate reality, one where Taiwan is part of China, where Beijing was not irresponsible in handling COVID-19, an alternate reality where the 9-dash line exists and where everything within it rightfully belongs to China. At least that's the version of reality that there are some websites and some news influencers that they would like to push. Obviously, Beijing would like to push this. And now the New York Times is saying that Singham and others are spending millions to fund this alternative reality or this narrative. The New York Times claims Singham and his network regularly met congressional aides. It says they train politicians in Africa several times a year. According to the New York Times, this is all being funded by Singham's shell companies and organized by his network. The goal is to create an echo chamber where the Chinese narrative is celebrated, promoted, and then when protesters or politicians paid by Singham or trained by Singham says something pro-China, NYT claims that Chinese media accounts retweet people and organizations in a systematic manner. They said it's done this at least 120 times since February 2020. Now look, let me be clear on something. There's nothing wrong with people having a particular point of view or believing whatever it is that they want to believe. There is nothing wrong with China Daily or Global Times saying that, oh, we are here to tell you this is the point of view according to China. And there may be people who accept that, and there may be people who buy that, and there may be people who genuinely think that China is great. That's fine. It's a free world, and people, well, it's not a free world everywhere, but outside China, it actually is a free world in many parts of the country, and there it is absolutely okay for people to believe whatever they want to believe. The question, though, comes if there is deception that is happening, if people are believing they're reading something and are not being told it's actually been paid for by Beijing or by anybody else. That is when an actual question arises. And that, I think, is what the New York Times article also raises question marks over. You could be left-wing, you could believe that China is great, you could believe and actually be doing things that you think are correct. But if somewhere along the way there's deception that has happened and you believe you're writing or reading something which you actually believe in but actually it's been paid for by somebody else, then there is a real question mark there which you need to think through. So what the New York Times is really saying is that China, through some of its foot soldiers, like allegedly Singham, is essentially trying to make you fall for lies through the back door. According to this article, Neville Roy Singham is not just one person in a global nexus through which China has actually penetrated media, the discourse of some of the world's leading democracies, and other methods. If this view is correct, then Beijing is using and paying third parties to wage a silent war, a war of narratives and a war of influence. And you shouldn't be surprised by any of that because, let's face it, China does have a history of using tactics to try to get exactly what it wants. It wants to dominate the global narrative. It wants to dominate the globe. It wants to dominate Asia. and it does certainly want to dominate the South China Sea. And here again, we saw something interesting, perhaps alarming, happening over the last few days. Now, let's face it, a large part of the world believes that Beijing does not actually have any legal basis to the latter, to the South China Sea, and therefore it is using muscle power to bully smaller nations. Look at this. This was not an accident or an accidental leak. This was China water cannoning and blocking a Philippines vessel. It happened on the 5th of August in the disputed South China Sea, near the Second Thomas Shoal, or to be more specific. Now, this is a submerged reef that both Beijing and Manila claim. The Philippines has stationed a rusting World War II era American ship in the shoal, which the Philippines troops use as a base. Beijing wants Manila to tow away the ship and to leave the area, to accept Chinese sovereignty over this entire area. The question is, are such acts of Chinese aggression the new normal? From waging silent wars for influence on land to water cannoning vessels on sea, where does it stop? And let me now put that question to Lisa Curtis, Senior Fellow and Director of the Indo-Pacific Security Program at the Center for a New American Security. Lisa, thank you so much for joining us, Lisa. Now, water cannons being used by Chinese ships on Filipino ships. Where is it headed? Do you think China is going to ratchet up the aggression all the way till, I don't know, till they invade Taiwan or something?
Well, I think what's happening is China's trying to intimidate the Philippines in particular. And this, follows other acts of intimidation that they've been engaging in. Of course, on Saturday, it was water cannons against the Philippines vessel that was trying to resupply the docked ship, the Sierra Madre, which has actually been there since 1999. The Philippines has had that ship docked there to defend its maritime claims and interests, because, of course, in the 1990s, China took control of Mischief Reef, which is another maritime feature that is in the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. So this was part of a pattern.
Well, Lisa, this is also a week where China was very much in the news because of the New York Times article and the accusations that propaganda is being done and influence has actually been bought, made headlines in India as well, because an Indian website was named there. Now, I know some of the people named in the NYT article has come out and said it's a new wave of McCarthyism that is being unleashed upon us just because we are left-wing, and just because they are propagating a socialist cause doesn't mean they should be dragged in. What's your own sense of it? Is China running a sophisticated propaganda campaign which is being paid for, or are some publications which are broadly left-wing just being dragged into this?
Well, look, I think we need to follow the facts. The Chinese are actively pushing their ideology, their propaganda. We know this. And they try to hide their hand in doing so. So I think, the New York Times investigative reporting is important because it shows us, where the money is coming from. It demonstrates how positions of certain organizations have changed over time to be more pro-China. So I think it's important that we ask these questions. Nobody wants another wave of McCarthyism. That was not good for anybody. But I don't think we can simply, wave these financial connections away. And we have to be smart and prudent about what the Chinese are doing, because they do have a sophisticated campaign pushing their own ideologies.
Lisa Curtis, thank you so much for joining us on This World. Thank you. Well, let's now talk about what's unfolding in Niger. The country's elected president has been captured. The military has seized power, closed the country's borders, installed a prime minister and a 21-person cabinet. It's almost as if the junta is now waiting for the world to react to its actions. But before we get to that, let's talk about some basics. First, this is where Niger is located, at the heart of the Sahel region, an area where terror groups like the ISIS and Al-Qaeda are rapidly expanding over the years. Several countries have actually sent troops to Niger. Why, you ask? Well, to guarantee security. France has around 1,500 troops in Niger. The Americans, more than 1,000 troops across 2 bases. Italy has 300 troops there, and the European Union has another at least 100 troops or thereabouts in Niger. And yet, together, these troops have somehow failed to check extremism and terrorism. Attacks on Niger's villages have become the new normal, and Niger's economy has taken a hit. The military pointed at this economic and geopolitical insecurity when overturning the elected government. Guess what? Many actually celebrated this coup. But frankly, toppling a democracy is normally very bad news, even if it's something that many saw coming, like in Niger, a former French colony with a history of several coups. So how did the world react? The ECOWAS, or the Economic Community of West Africa States, put Niger's junta on a hard deadline. They're given until the 6th of August to restore the elected government. The junta refused to stand down. Instead, it closed the country's airspace. On the 10th of May, ECOWAS leaders met for a summit in Nigeria. Speaking of Niger, the bloc said all options are open, including the use of force.
You will see from the communique of this extraordinary summit that no option is taken off the table, including the use of force.
Direct the Committee of the Chief of Defense Staff to activate the ECOWAS standby force with all its elements immediately. Order the deployment of the ECOWAS standby force to restore constitutional order in the Republic of Niger.
There you have it, the bloc activating its standby force. But what does this mean for the region's security? Remember, the foreign troops still remain in Niger. There's also talk of Russia's private mercenary group, the Wagner Group, sending troops to Niger. This after the Wagner boss has openly supported the coup. The obvious question is, what next? And for more on the situation now in Niger, we have with us David Otto, Director for Geneva Center for Africa Securities and Strategic Studies. David, thank you so much for being with us. What is the latest that you can tell us on the situation in Niger? And is it actually going to become a wider war of some sort?
Well, literally, ECOWAS has declared war against the military junta in Niger's republic. And of course, but what we know so far is that, it made 2 decisions which are quite key and crucial. One, it asked the Chief of Defense Staff, that's the Chief of Securities within all the ECOWAS member states, it asked them to activate the ECOWAS standby force, meaning that, they should prepare for a military intervention, and it asked them to deploy the ECOWAS standby force to restore, the constitutional rule. But it doesn't actually give the time frame as to when this intervention will take place.
But of course, one question is whether it just gets restricted to what's happening in West Asia and West Asian countries getting involved. Could there be a broader involvement, perhaps getting in some of the European countries as well, is the other question. I mean, the Wagner Group obviously is there, and there's some talk that could be supporting the junta. Many other European powers also have some soldiers out there. Do you think it could become a broader conflict involving them as well?
We're likely to see a disintegration of ECOWAS into 2 factions, which could possibly be another proxy war, some kind of a Ukraine playing over, this time around Niger. What we're likely to see, again, as you rightly mentioned, is that possibly Wagner may, join the faction of Niger, including Burkina Faso and Mali. I think simply because the Wagner de facto leader not sure whether he still heads that group, Yevgeny Prigozhin. He made it very clear that the coup in Niger was a demonstration and an indication of the clamping down of colonialism and Western influence in that region. So he is likely to influence perhaps, the ECOWAS, the Wagner forces that are based in that region to support.
All right, David Otto, thank you so much for joining us. Enough conflict, I think, in the world, but sadly, no signs that it's going to ease in Niger anytime in the near future. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Our final story is about Mars. The red planet is spinning faster with every passing year. The standard Martian day is 24 hours and 37 minutes long. Now, with every passing year, days on Mars are becoming shorter because with every passing year, Mars is spinning faster by 4 milliarc seconds. That's 0.76 milliseconds every year. Scientists aren't sure why, and frankly, it may not even matter that much. It may be not something that unusual, but the science behind this is really interesting. The question is, how do scientists sitting so far away know about this small change? The science is really interesting. Scientists studied data from the NASA InSight lander. It landed on Mars in 2018 and ran out of power 4 years later. Now, while InSight was still active, NASA's Deep Space Network blasted powerful radio signals towards Mars. These signals were received by InSight's RISE instrumentation, or the Rotation and Interior Structure Experiment instrument, and then it was reflected back to Earth. What scientists were essentially relying on was the Doppler shift. What's that, you ask? Well, the Doppler shift is the same effect that causes sirens of emergency vehicles like ambulances or a fire brigade to rise in pitch as it approaches you, but as that vehicle moves away, the pitch drops. Similarly, InSight signals had a higher frequency when it was on the hemisphere facing the Earth, and when the planet turned, the signals had shorter frequency. I hope you're with me so far. Doppler effect, by the way, really important. It helps you track all sorts of things in space. Now, scientists noticed a variation in the signals over the course of time. They studied the frequency of signals from 900 days on Mars, and they concluded that the planet is spinning faster with every passing year. One Martial year, by the way, is 687 Earth days. Now to the big question. Why is Mars's rotation picking up speed? Does it really matter? Will it impact us in any significant manner or any manner whatsoever, given Mars's proximity to the Earth? Like we told you, scientists don't have a short answer to why the change in speed is taking place. They believe it could be because of accumulation of ice on Mars's polar cap. Now, this, by the way, isn't the first time that a planet has actually started to spin faster. Do you know that our home planet, the Earth, no longer takes 24 hours to rotate on its axis? It's taking at least 1.50 milliseconds less. And why is this happening? Again, no short answers there. Scientists are saying, well, there could be melting glaciers and less weight at the poles. Seismic activity is also possible, perhaps a deviation in the Earth's axis of rotation. Now, look, this is all interesting science, but really, to be completely honest, and I'm going to get a scientist to help me understand this, it may not actually matter all that much. And for more on that, we're now being joined by Dr. Amitabh Ghosh, NASA Mars scientist. Dr. Ghosh, thank you so much for joining us. Now, this entire Mars spinning faster, it's obviously making headlines, but is it unusual? Doesn't it happen fairly frequently that bodies spin faster or slower? Or is it unusual?
No, this is actually very normal. So I think the story sounds kind of very sensational and alarming. Every planet is doing that on a constant basis. For example, Earth is also perhaps, I forget, probably it is also spinning a little faster so that you're, or slower. And there is a change. For example, there was
1.50 milliseconds earlier, I think, is less. So you're right. Earth is also spinning faster.
Right. So what's happening here is there are many reasons. So see, the reason that is cited in the story may not, it's a non-unique reason. For Earth, they're saying that, well, maybe the groundwater depletion is causing this change of mass distribution, which is causing. But again, this is a non-unique solution. So here also it's a non-unique solution. It happens to everybody. And, everybody has certain changes, tiny changes, which are happening over a million-year time scale.
All right, Dr. Ghosh, I think you're right. There are lots of interesting aspects of this that do continue to be looked at. But it's interesting that you're saying don't sit and worry or get too alarmed about the fact that it's going faster. Thank you so much, Dr. Ghosh, for joining us with that. Okay, folks, so there you have it. Mars is spinning faster and it's making headlines. But frankly, I keep telling you there are things that you need to worry about. If I were you, I wouldn't worry about Mars spinning faster just yet or even pay it all that much attention. And that's what we're here to tell you. That's all the time we have for you this week, but we will see you soon with a fresh lineup of stories. I'm Vikram Chandra, and you're watching This World on WION World is One.
They say teamwork makes the dream work. At Gravitas, we live by this motto. We believe in scripts, not stars. We believe in stories, not stature. We value collaboration,